Greetings, true believers. It's episode 50 of Radio Free Innsmouth, and this week we're going to be talking about the Chasm, because they're one of my favorite bands, and my actuary says there is a 7.6% increase in my chances of landing a Goth Latina GF if I cover a band that started in Mexico.
Loser! You're a loser! Are you feeling sorry for yourself?
Actually, it's because I got to see them live over the weekend, which is a pretty big deal. I wasn't even aware of the fact they play live. I first heard the Chasm back in 2007, right before I was going to college, and they've been one of my favorite bands for quite a while. I guess you could say I've been into these guys most of my adult life.
Ha! Gay!
They play what some might term expert-level big boy death metal for grown-ups. This isn't the kind of death metal that you're going to get your hipster friends into and then they'll try and clone the sound and make a bunch of shitty bands and play a bunch of shitty shows and open up for good bands when they come in, and then the audience is only going to go see the shitty band, and instead of moshing, they'll just hold their phones up the whole time and then leave when the actual headliner's on stage so they never fucking come back to your city. Yeah, no, they're really good. The first album I heard of theirs was their third album, Death Cult for Eternity, The Triumph. It opens with a little ditty called Revenge Rises. So I was hooked literally from the first note of this. I love the guitar sound. I love the riffing style, utilizing bar chords to create an expansive cosmic atmosphere of darkness. And more importantly, I love the songwriting, which has more in common with progressive rock and classical music than it does with most forms of modern rock music or even a lot of metal. This is a little bit of motif variation where they've taken that opening thing and done a bit of a reaction to it through palm muting. It all flows very naturally, so they're capable of doing very long, complex songs, but it stays interesting because they shift the mood around so much and everything flows so naturally into the next part. And there's some Slayer-style whammy bar abuse, which is to be expected because I saw an interview with Daniel Corchado from years and years ago. That's the main guy behind this band. And he said his favorite album of all time was Slayer's Hell Awaits, which explains the Chasm's propensity for very long instrumental intros, outros, and segues, and layering of sounds. That was Hell Awaits is the Slayer album that does that more than any of their other releases. So that's Revenge Rises, but the full title of this track is Revenge Rises / Drowned in the Mournful Blood. So that's the Revenge Rises portion. Here's what happens when you get drowned in some mournful blood. His vocals are fucking nuts. Like, they're not even designed to be memorable or anything. It's just him screaming. And I love it. There's some mournful blood. So by now you've figured out the Chasm kind of plays melodic death metal, but with a very savage bent to it. And now we're getting into some more complex layering of sounds and Slayer-style use of backing chords under disdainful, sinister melodies. Bit of At the Gates influence in there too, or rather, I think that the Chasm and At the Gates were into similar stuff, so it's probably a bit of convergent evolution. Thrash riff time. Really good at building anticipation. Man, when they played this song live, it blew my fucking mind. It's even better live than it is on record. So nobody really sounds like the Chasm. They have a very unique take on what death metal should sound like, rooted in the darkness of the 80s, specifically a lot of Slayer Later on in this song, there's a very strange breakdown that verges on an evil version of a Johann Strauss waltz or something. Don't worry, I mosh during this part, because I'm a cool dude. Crazy fucking 3/4 time signature riff. With complicated melodies. But it's torn apart by some very dissonant, Voivod-esque bar chord work. So, by now you've figured out that the Chasm are an expert in the art of transitioning.
Ha! Gay!
No, not like that. Get your mind out of the gutter there, mister. I'm talking about linking together disparate ideas within your music in such a way that they no longer feel disparate. So if you were able to play any given part of a Chasm song in isolation and then jump ahead like 30 seconds to another part, they would seem like they're from completely different songs. But if you hear them both in the context of all the other parts around it, it makes sense, because they have really good awareness of tone and of how to move different parts into each other. This awareness for aesthetics and how they can be manipulated was even utilized by Daniel Corchado himself in terms of his appearance over the course of the show. When he was running in the merch booth, he's a pretty friendly, approachable, normal guy, wearing a Pink Floyd shirt, shaking hands, taking pictures with people, glad to see everybody, wearing that, he's rocking out that Pink Floyd shirt because he's got the prog rock influences. But when he goes on stage with his other band, Aceris, who are a heavy metal band in very 1980s style, he switched it up to wearing a Grim Reaper shirt.
Excellent!
And he gets this like crazy happy facial expression, and everybody on stage is running around and rocking out and just acting like 80s maniacs. But then when he comes back after 2 more openers with the Chasm, it's like his face changes. He just looks really dour, and he's morbidly grinning and just kind of very evil looking, and he's making out pronouncements between songs like,
Denver, I know it's late, but you could be dead tomorrow, and all that is left is a cosmic landscape of sorrow.
Like that kind of shit. Fucking dope. So the Chasm, they're putting together stuff from all over the place. Progressive rock, classical music, death metal, black metal, lots of fucking thrash. And they're doing it in a way where it all makes sense. This even extends to the different kind of guitar techniques they use. For instance, in their, Jesus Christ, which album is this one? The third to last one, I guess? The 2004 one, whatever. There's so many fucking Chasm albums, I own all of them, and they all run together in my head. But the first song on that one utilizes a variety of different guitar techniques. For instance, they do this thing where you're picking an open string as a drone note and then kind of slamming your fingers down on top of it, like on and off. So it's like halfway to tapping, but you're still using the guitar pick. It sounds a little bit like this. They're also doing a lot of sweep picking, which is when you essentially play something like an arpeggio or whatever really fast up and down by raking your pick across multiple strings in sequence as you do hammer-ons and pull-offs with your fretting hand. They do some very new wave of British heavy metal style palm-muted galloping riffs. In addition to the sweep picking, they use arpeggios in a different way, where they kind of do a Wagner thing. You have variant leitmotifs based around the same idea. So you get one version of the arpeggio that sounds like this, one that's like this, and one that's like this. So each of those is made up of almost the same notes apart from the resolution of the musical phrase. So each of them has a different feel to it, even though they're based around the same basic musical idea. They also do a little bit of that what did I call that? The polka riff? I talked about it last week with like a Monomarth, Dismember, and In Flames doing it. It goes like this. So how do you take all of these disparate elements and blend it together for the smooth taste of vintage The Chasm? Well, let's listen to the song to find out. So we're fading in with that open string drone type thing with a bit of a flanger, or however you pronounce it, on it. So very psychedelic, betraying their progressive rock roots. Some nice ambient drumming that keeps returning to the pulse of the music, across which Antonio Leon's cymbals skitter. Some nice palm muting going on. And the drone transitions seamlessly into the sweep picking. Here comes those arpeggio motifs. Gotta have a good bell noise. Those specific kind of arpeggio riffs are unique to the Chasm. And then there's the polka. But it's linked to those arpeggio things because they do them at the end as kind of melodic arabesques to the overall chugging. So it all flows very smoothly and gives you this epic feeling of a cosmic funeral procession. Good warm-up track at the gym, I find. So that idea of a macrocosmic funeral procession that I just kind of came up with is very much in keeping with the Chasm's lyrical content. You got songs like Architects of Melancholic Apocalypse, The Grave Fields, Arrival to Hopeless Shores, Calling the Paranormal Abysm, Revenge Rises Drowned in the Mournful Blood, like I mentioned earlier, Cosmic Landscapes of Sorrow, A Dream of an Astral Spectrum to an Eternal Hate, A Conscious Creation from the Isolated Domain, Chapter 2, Crater Abysm of Decomposed Dreams?
I get it. I don't get it.
Well, it makes more sense if you consider the fact that the Chasm used vocals not really as a focal point of the song, but rather to announce transitions. So if they're shifting over to like a more mid-paced thrash section after a fast section, you might get an and then he'll bark out some sort of esoteric phrase at you. The songs themselves aren't really meant to convey a message in the way that, say, a punk song does. Rather, the medium is the message. They use these very mellifluous and adjective-laden descriptions of macrocosmic despair to paint a picture in your mind to go along with these very guitar-oriented mini symphonies. It's all based around what the guitar is doing, not necessarily what Daniel is yelling at you or what the lyrics are about, per se. But, as pretentious as that might sound, the Chasm managed to pull themselves out of the hole of being too far up their own ass by injecting a heavy dose of 80s style thrash and heavy metal flavor. So even when they do a really weird riff, it'll still be a thrash riff, for instance. So here's some more spooky arpeggios before we get into the thrash riff. That's your thrash riff, and he lets you know about it. Motherfucker actually yells thrash. It's so sick.
I moshed a little hard when this part happened during the show. Distinct possibility of that.
On the flip side, even when they do simpler, more 80s style stuff, they'll still inject a bit of that Chasm complexity into it so that it all feels like it's part of the same band. For instance, the intro riff set to Reaching the Veil of Death. Very Slayer-esque, chugging open string riff with a totally moshable drum beat under it, but they still inject the Chasm melody between each of the palm muted parts to keep it flowing with the rest of the song and the album. So, oh wow, that's very Slayer. So you might be asking, how do I get into the Chasm, man? What's a good album to start with? I looked these guys up online. They've been around for like 30 years. They got a fuck ton of albums.
Well, let me tell you something, brother.
Fair warning, don't try their newest album as your first. It's a very good album, but it's also completely instrumental and very long, and a lot of it is them pushing their sound to see how weird they can make it. So if you're not familiar with their other material, you might not like it at first listen, and it might turn you off the band. Fair warning on that. I would start out with Spell of Retribution. I think that's probably their most accessible album, and it also shows like most of what they're about. There's a lot of variety on that. With that said, keep it real, motherfuckers. Stay frosty, and I'll see you next week.